Hello and welcome to this week's midweek message. In Numbers chapter 21, the children of Israel grew impatient and grumbled against Moses and against the Lord himself for their wandering in the wilderness. As a consequence, for their punishment, the Lord sent among them fiery serpents, and anyone who was bitten by the fiery serpent died. When the people cried out in penitence, the Lord gave Moses instructions that they might be relieved and that lives might be spared. In Numbers chapter 21, beginning in verse 8, the Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a standard, and it shall come about that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, he will live." And Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a standard. And it came about that if a serpent bit any man, when he looked on the bronze serpent, he lived. God gave Moses instructions here, and instructions then shared with the children of Israel for their salvation, that their lives might be spared for a wholly good purpose. But as is so often the case, men have a way of turning something that God gives for our good, for our benefit, and turning it into something that's evil. In 2 Kings chapter 18, Hezekiah became king over Judah. He was only 25 years old, but he is commended in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 3, because he did right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David had done. David here was his forefather, not his immediate father, but a forefather several generations removed. Specifically, Hezekiah is commended in this text in verse 4 because he removed the high places and broke down the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherah. That is, he went about purging idolatry from the land of Judah. Those false gods in the form of various beasts and various images made of wood and stone and precious metal. He set about removing those from the land of Judah so that the people would not worship idols, but worship the true and living God. But notice the rest of that same verse. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the sons of Israel burned incense to it, and it was called Nehushtan. The children of Israel had taken the bronze serpent and turned it into an idol. They had taken something that God intended for their good, for their benefit, to save their lives in the midst of the punishment of the fiery serpents back in Numbers chapter 21, and turned it into something that was evil, burning incense to it, worshiping it as an image, an idol, instead of worshiping God himself, violating one of the explicit commandments of the law given first in Exodus chapter 20. The children of Israel took what was good and turned it into something that was evil. We need to be warned about doing the same thing, about taking those things that are good, things that are given for our benefit, even for our enjoyment in our lives, and turning them into idols. Most of the time when we think about idols, we think about graven images. We think about statues that are made out of wood and precious metals and perhaps adorned with gemstones. We think about those physical idols that were often worshipped in Old Testament history and about which there are warnings even in the New Testament. But in the 21st century America in which we lived, we're largely removed from that kind of idolatry. But idols are just as much a danger for us today as they were in the days of the New Testament or even in the days of the Old Testament. We, like the children of Israel, can take good things, things that are meant by God for our benefit and our enjoyment, and turn them into the objects of our devotion, the objects of our worship, rather than loving the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That can happen with regards to relationships. It might be our husband or our wife who becomes our idol. We want nothing more than to do what they want. Regardless of what God wants for us, we're interested in pleasing them above all else. And in that way, they become our idol. It might be a significant other if you're not married, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, someone that you're more interested in pleasing than anything else. If that happens, that person has become your idol. They've become your God. For parents, it might be their children. So many mothers and fathers have their lives turned upside down and inside out because they want nothing more than to please their children, to do what their children want most. Don't misunderstand me. I understand that parents want to do good by their children. They want their children to enjoy their lives and have benefits that they might enjoy and that the parents themselves might not have enjoyed in their childhood. But when those children become the object of our devotion, the focus of our lives, around which everything else revolves, they've become our idol. They've taken the place of God, or at least rivaled the love and devotion of which only He is truly worthy. It might be other members of our families. For children or grandchildren, it might be those who've come before them. It might be friends or other relationships in our lives that God intended for our good, relationships God intended for us to enjoy. But when they rival the devotion of which only He is due, they become our idols. The same might be true with our material blessings, the physical things that we enjoy in this life. It might be that our stuff, whatever that stuff might be, becomes our idol, whether it's cars or boats or toys or big boy toys, as the case might be. Whatever it is that we enjoy, whatever collection we might have, whatever we might use in our hobbies or recreation, our stuff can become the all-consuming focus of our lives. For others, it might be the money itself with which we buy these things. It might be our job by which we earn the money so that we can buy these things, or the education that we're pursuing so that we can get the job, so that we have the money to buy these things. You see, material blessings are intended by God, from God, to be enjoyed, to be used for good reasons. But when they become the object of our devotion, when they become the consuming influence of our lives, they begin to rival the place that only God should occupy in our hearts. They become our idol. It might be that pleasure becomes our idol. The things we do for recreation and entertainment, the technology that we use to consume that entertainment and share that entertainment with others. We need to be careful that while those blessings can be used, and hopefully for good purposes, just like we're doing now, those things can become an idol. They can become such a consuming influence in our lives that they drown out spiritual interest and push more important things to the side. It might be that our good deeds, the things that we do charitably for the benefit of others, our own physical health, these are other things that can become the focus of our attention so much that we don't leave place for the Lord in our lives. Jesus said, "If anyone will come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow after me." Jesus warned that we must love Him more than even our own families. Paul warned about the corrupting influence of sin in which men would become lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. These warnings we read in the New Testament warn us that we too can become guilty of idolatry. Maybe not in the same way as the children of Israel worshiping the bronze serpent or other physical idols. Maybe not the ways that we traditionally think of idolatry, but forms of idolatry nonetheless. The teaching of the Scriptures on this subject could not be clearer. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 7, the Apostle Paul, based on the history of Israel's behavior, tells us plainly, do not become idolaters as some of them were. And in verse 14 of the same chapter, he says even more directly, flee from idolatry. In Galatians chapter 5 and verse 20, the Apostle Paul lists idolatry among the works of the flesh, those things that will keep us from inheriting the pleasures of the Lord's presence. Perhaps most direct of all, the Apostle John in 1 John chapter 5 and verse 21 admonishes little children, guard yourselves from idols. Thanks for watching.